Hey there, welcome back to Need to Know. We've been gone for about a month and now we're back and we have so much to talk about, not only the things that are going on in ufology, but even an anniversary or two. Here's what we're going to be talking about today. And one of the things that's kind of interesting is there's articles making their way around the internet talking about the collapse of news swagger. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Also, it's the 1 year anniversary since Dave Grush first told his story, at least to Ross. And we're going to talk about the Arrow postmortem again, because these guys are the gift that keep on giving over there at the Pentagon. We'll talk about the Eglin Air Force Base story, do a little question and answer like we did last time, which seemed to be a lot of fun. And we might even have to do a Hollywood spoiler about a recent TV show that's on the air that, almost had to be seen to be believed. Anyway, that's what we got going. Let's bring in Ross Coulthard in Australia. Ross, tell me, how's your month going?
G'day, Bryce. How are you, Squire? Look, it's been a very busy time. I'm writing a speech for the SCU, the Scientific Coalition for the Study of UAPs conference in Huntsville, Alabama, in just a few weeks' time. And I'm having one of those panics that you have when you're trying to write a speech and trying to stay topical. But the whole story of UAPs is moving so fast at the moment, it's very hard to be current. Every day there's some new story.
There absolutely is. I've been working on some writing of my own, and I know the feeling. I mean, all writers kind of get this, whether it's a speech or whether it's an article or whether it's a screenplay. There's a certain point where you go, why did they pick me to do this? Why didn't they get somebody competent to do this? And you begin to self-doubt a little bit and all that. And that kind of thing happens. And by the way, Ross, before we get started, do you think this is too large for the show? I mean,
What is it
what
about
are you
America?
drinking?
What is it about Americans? Like, I drink a perfectly reasonable cup of coffee in the morning, and your cup of joe is the size of a car. Seriously.
I'm drinking water. I've been told to drink more water. I am off caffeine though, so if I fall asleep during the show, you'll know I'm not properly caffeinated anymore. Hey, listen,
Americans, you have big space rockets, big cars, big meals. There's a theme here.
well, our restaurant portion sizes are too big. I think they're the biggest in the entire world, and that's probably got to stop. But that's another show. Listen, it's been a year since David Grush first came out here to Los Angeles, and you and I were here in LA. You were kind enough to introduce me to him in person. And then the very next day, you went out and recorded that incredible News Nation interview with David Grush. It didn't actually air, of course, until June, but he was here and he had told it, and News Nation had it in their pocket as of May. Was it May 5th, or might have been a day or two before? Wow, what a year that has been. I'm just kind of curious for you to reflect a little bit on where you think that story has gone, because Dave is first, he took the world by storm with your interview, and then he testified in July before Congress. And now he's been on a number of shows like ours and other shows. And then he's also, it was inevitable, had his own pushback from various people who purport to want to know the truth about ufology. So I just think he has been through something, and so have you. What are your thoughts?
Look, I think we've come a long way in 1 year. I think a lot of people in the world of UAP social media want it all yesterday. So do I, frankly. I think there's been a real disappointment caused by the defeat of the Schumer amendment, the Chuck Schumer legislation that would have given more protection for whistleblowers. I think if that legislation had passed the House, we'd be a lot further advanced, and you would be seeing more of the whistleblowers that David Grush referred to giving evidence, probably in public hearings. But look, I took heart the other week from the fact that even Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, the senator for New York, has indicated that she is keen to see public hearings. Other congressional representatives and senators have indicated that they're keen to push ahead with hearings. And I know also that contrary to what's being misreported by some people on social media, there is still an active intelligence community inspector general investigation ongoing. People I'm aware of who are part of David Grush's informant base have recently been questioned by the intelligence community inspector general. An investigation is ongoing. And I notice a lot of people have made merry of the fact that Sean Kirkpatrick, that scallywag who used to run ARROW, the Pentagon's UFO investigation office, gave an interview recently where he said that he wasn't aware of any ongoing inquiries, and he's been playing down the significance of a lot of what David Grush says. The simple fact is, Sean Kirkpatrick would not know, and neither should he know, and he would know this legally. He's not entitled to know anything about any ongoing intelligence community inspector general investigation. We just have to wait, my friend. And I think people have to be patient. It's as simple as that. There are interesting things happening and good things coming.
One of the interesting things, well, first of all, we should just clarify to people when we toss around the term ARROW stands for the Pentagon's program called the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which issued a report a couple of months ago that's kind of incredible and controversial. But going back to Grush for just a second here, Ross, just to wrap this up, one of what ties those two stories together is that Sean Kirkpatrick, who you mentioned, said he was going to talk to anybody who wanted to talk to him, and he would look into this. And of course, the expectation was that Dave Grush had spoken to him, and I thought he had. And then I guess I'm learning now that he hadn't. And I just wondered how do we square that circle? What was Grush's intent first, and did he talk to him or did he not talk to him?
What was going on? It's very, very interesting, this, because there's been a lot of froth and bubble about this on social media. And I noticed Dave issued a statement the other week, which basically said that he wasn't confident that ARROW was able to protect all of the security classification concerns that he had. Frankly, you know what? I don't care. The bottom line is we're well beyond taking ARROW seriously. There is this petulant upset from Dr. Kirkpatrick at the idea that David Grush didn't want to speak to him. Well, why the fuck should David Grush take anything Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick says seriously? The man has demonstrated an utter lack of objectivity. I don't know whether he's just misinformed or whether he's being misled by people inside the Pentagon. But frankly, ARROW is not doing its job. And I'm going to go into detail about an Eglin Air Force Base story that we know about a bit later in the program. But frankly, I think David Grush is perfectly within his rights to make a decision that he did not trust ARROW. It's as simple as that. And we
certainly would have been with. Go ahead. Go.
No, I just think we have all these shills for the Pentagon who are basically saying, oh, he didn't talk to ARROW. He lied. Bottom line is, there are very, very good reasons for why the fox should not be in charge of the hen house. If what we are being told is true by David Grush, if what David Grush is saying is correct, and I suspect it is, that the Pentagon or people within the Pentagon and the intelligence community are presiding over a criminal cover-up, why the hell would David Grush trust ARROW, the Pentagon's UFO investigation office, to objectively investigate? Now, I want to emphasize, I know there are people in the Pentagon's ARROW office who are well motivated and good, and they are as frustrated as I am and as David Grush is by the way that certain leadership have conducted themselves. But just at the moment, I think David Grush has every right to be skeptical about the rigor and objectivity that would be brought to any ARROW investigation into his allegations.
He does have the right to be skeptical, particularly after the report came out. I think we eviscerated that report pretty radically a couple of episodes ago. There's not a lot in it that makes you a fan of Sean Kirkpatrick or makes you believe that the guy was really trying to write a truthful and direct report. I guess part of the the decision making here was that David Grush must have known what Kirkpatrick was up to prior to the report coming out in order to form an opinion, not to trust him to tell him before the report came out. And I'm sure he did know that. And frankly, as I understand it, as you understand it, Kirkpatrick did talk to some other people, but he completely disregarded them in his final report. So it's not a great report. Nobody can be happy about that thing. And I guess I'm just kind of wondering if you think it has in any way tarnished the ability of Grush's story to move forward, or do you know otherwise that it is moving forward in very specific ways? What are your thoughts on that?
Look, it's only I actually don't understand. I've had a lot of people asking me, how's David Grush feeling under all of these attacks? There's a lot of froth and bubble from self-important people on social media who have accused David of lying. I talk regularly to people in Congress who strongly believe the veracity of what David Grush is saying. And if you remember, I mean, people forget so easily. You had various congressmen, congressional representatives, and senators all verifying the authenticity of what David Grush said when he gave evidence. Frankly, the Inspector General of the intelligence community made a finding that David Grush's allegations, which included, by the way, crash retrieval and reverse engineering allegations, were credible and urgent. And a lot of what we're hearing at the moment is, frankly, the kind of froth and bubble that in the to and fro of warfare, you just have to let it go by. There's a lot of people getting themselves into a little ranty state, getting themselves into a little hissy fit. What they're worried about is what's going to happen, which is that eventually things are going to come to the fore. And it may not be happening as quickly as people in UAP social media want it to happen, but it's going to happen.
And of course, I guess the question that we're looking into here is like, it is Fox in the henhouse. To ask the U.S. Pentagon to issue a credible report in the first place was something that you could imagine Congress doing because they trust the institutions, but it wasn't a great report, and it wasn't really credible that they should actually trust anybody to do that. And so that brings me to what we were talking about. There's another report out right now. I can't remember who even is saying this, but they're talking about the collapse of journalism and how journalism has lost its swagger. And frankly, we wouldn't need to rely on the all domain anomaly resolution office if we had some journalists with the swagger that they need. You have that swagger, my friend, and it's a good swagger. Swagger is not a bad thing. It's like where you say, I can make a difference. I can ask anybody a question about anything, and I can report the information. So kudos to you for doing that. But do you feel that that's an accurate representation of journalism on this topic?
Look, the article you were talking about is a very important article in Politico, the online magazine. Yes. And funnily enough, it's interesting that it was written by an online magazine because it probably wouldn't be written by mainstream media. One of the things I find fascinating, and I say this as somebody who's worked for many decades in the mainstream media, is that the level of importance that is attached to mainstream national newspapers like the Washington Post, the New York Times, mainstream TV networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, which frankly have largely failed to properly investigate the issue of UAPs. And there's this soul-searching article that appeared on Politico that talked about how newsrooms are losing their swagger, and isn't it terrible that online's eating away at our revenue, and us terribly important people in the mainstream media are losing our power and our influence. Oh, diddums. You know what? I don't feel a shred of sympathy for these people. These organizations have become far too woke, far too scared, and far too timid about getting into the stories that matter. I mean, just today, we've had a congressional committee that's finally started looking at the issue of the causes of the COVID-19 virus. And increasingly, contrary to what we were being told by a lot of people in mainstream media who were being fed a line by certain labs and certain people in epidemiology, it does increasingly look like the preponderance of evidence suggests there was a lab leak from the Chinese laboratory. This story was suppressed in the American media. And another story that's being suppressed largely in the American media, with the notable exclusion of Need to Know and News Nation, is the story of UAPs. And these organizations that are lamenting their loss of influence, that are lamenting their decline, should be taking a long, hard look at the fact that here are you and I getting millions of viewers for our stories in some cases. People are engaging with us, taking a close interest in the stories that we're telling because they want these stories. They're interested in them. They want investigative rigor into stories that the mainstream media is avoiding. It's not that hard.
It's not that hard. You've done it, are doing it. And in fact, that is for me the thing that just continues to bother me about this. We've both been in journalism a long time. I've worked in a number of journalistic outlets in TV and off TV. And the stigma of UFOs is a real thing. It has actually, over the years, prevented almost any journalism with swagger to come out of the mainstream media on this topic. And obviously, it's time for that to end. And there it is. It sits there right now as a great big story that would be a fantastic piece of investigative journalism for journalists to compete breaking. And yet they're not doing that. Why are they not doing it? Some of it is self-censorship, which is something I've always said, that everybody wants to be, I think journalism sometimes is like high school and everybody wants to be cool. And they're worried that if they really take on the UFO subject, they might not be cool enough to their peers. And that stuff's got to stop. But I really think it's time for some swagger on the UFO issue, because clearly there's enough there to talk about. And we can continue to beat that. But on the other hand, I say, let's just do a little of it. Let's talk about this Eglin Air Force Base case, because for people that want to know about it, this is the one, by the way, that unfortunately the person who advocated it most in politics, which is, as you can imagine, politicized, has been Matt Gaetz, who I think is kind of like a hirsute Eddie Munster, if you will. And he sort of undermines his own credibility because a lot of people don't take him that seriously because he's been so ultra partisan, and it's too bad. But the point that I want to say is forget the messenger in the political field on that, folks. Ross, I think you should just hone in. You've got some breaking news on this story that I think is just fascinating. And the news you've got, folks, pay attention. This is the kind of stuff you need to say, oh, I have to give this story extra special attention. So take it away, my friend.
So we were talking about AARO, and we were talking about how AARO completely failed to do an honest and objective report in its historical review of what the US government does or doesn't know about the UAP mystery. And then a couple of weeks later, they followed up with another attempt at sledgehammering the whole issue back into a box. And this was their report into the 26th of January 2023, last year. There was an incident that took place where a pilot took off from Eglin Air Force Base in Florida and flew out over the Gulf of Mexico and saw what he described as an Apollo command module shaped object, and kind of an acorn shaped object in the sky at around about 16,000 feet. And he saw it first on radar. He saw 4 objects on his radar. And then finally, when he got visual, what he saw was quite extraordinary. And indubitably, that pilot thought the object was anomalous. He most certainly did not think it was a balloon. And he was so concerned about what he saw and the fact that this object posed a risk to flight safety and clearly national security, that he actually made a confidential disclosure to Congress. And Matt Gaetz, the Republican congressman from Florida, was the person whom he contacted. And you might remember there was a huge hullabaloo because the commander of Eglin Air Force Base arrogantly tried to block access by the congressman because he was in the company of two other Congress people who did not have the Oversight Committee authorization to do this kind of investigation, Tim Burchett and Anna Paulina Luna. But finally, Gates got in and he was allowed to see what the pilot had seen. And I'm saying that very neutrally. And what he came out saying, Matt Gaetz, was that he was very shocked and concerned by what he'd seen. So AARO was under some pressure to investigate. This was a recent UAP sighting. And frankly, I think in the Pentagon, they went, right, we've got to shut this one down as quickly as possible. And so they've published a report just a couple of weeks ago, their resolution report, as they call it. And in their resolution report, they basically said there was a sighting by one military pilot. He only observed one of the objects visually and captured two images of the single object via the aircraft's electro-optical infrared sensor. And importantly, AARO claimed in its report that the pilot couldn't record video because of the aircraft's video recording equipment being inoperable. Well, somebody's lying for a start, or at least misleading the Air Force, because the Air Force has since put out an FOI response basically acknowledging that there is a video. So two arms of the Air Force aren't speaking to each other. There's an excellent FOI called, and I apologize if I mispronounce his name, oh gosh, Damasway. Anyway, he's basically received an FOI which basically acknowledged that there was indeed a video. Abbas Damasay received a letter from the Air Force stating the responsive video you are requesting is not releasable to you in accordance with an executive order for national security reasons. Now, I give you all that preface because just a couple of days ago, I had a conversation with a pilot, and this is the new information. The pilot told me that subsequent to that January the 26th incident, he and a group of other pilots were due to go out into that training range over the Gulf of Mexico. And they were briefed about this anomalous incident. And they weren't just told about one F-22 Raptor pilot seeing the object. They were told about two. And this is something AARO has not revealed. They have deliberately failed to reveal to the public the full extent of what they either should know or what they do know. Because any reasonable investigation by AARO ought properly to have revealed to the public that there was one pilot that flew out from Eglin Air Force Base, and there was another that flew out from Tyndall Air Force Base, 12 miles east of Panama City, Florida. Both pilots independently verified the four objects on their radar, and both independently saw the same anomalous single object. And Bryce, this is the kicker. Both of them, without talking to each other, came back to their bases and provided a sighting report that apparently matched exactly what the first pilot said they saw, which was this weird object. Neither of them thought it was a balloon. Both of them thought it was anomalous. And yet we have AARO, I think, perhaps deliberately misleading the public, or worse still, perhaps the US Air Force hasn't told AARO the full story. Maybe AARO, when they were doing their supposed investigation, weren't told by the Air Force that there was a second F-22 Raptor flying out from Tyndall. The big question now is who is lying? Because frankly, we now know there were two F-22 Raptor pilots that saw an anomalous object over the Gulf of Mexico. It wasn't a balloon, and sure as hell, the report that's been released by AARO in a desperate attempt to put a finger in the dike on UAP sightings right now is a complete joke.
Excellent, by the way. And the thing that really I think is astonishing is that AARO, in their report about this, basically said that it was very likely an ordinary object, not exhibiting anomalous or exceptional characteristics or flight behaviors. And they had moderate confidence in this assessment. and they thought it was probably a lighter than air object, such as a large form factor balloon, or a meteorological balloon, or a large mylar balloon, or a large commercial helium filled lighting. So a lot of balloon stuff in their discussion, Ross. But here's what the pilot told Arrow, at least as I understand it. The pilot reported seeing a gray object with a paneled surface. Okay, first of all, I don't know balloons that have paneled surfaces, and orange-red coloring at the center. He basically also reported it as being 12 feet in diameter, which I guess could be a balloon, and either moved very slowly or was stationary. He said the bottom half of the object was rounded, and so was the top. It was a 3D cone shape, similar to the shape of the Apollo spacecraft. There was a heat signature from the bottom portion, and he described blurry air. So I guess the only thing I want to narrow on, because I think people are kind of interested, what do we know literally about what the pilot said he saw? Because acorn-shaped object is one thing. We all know what an acorn kind of looks like. The Apollo command module is one of the most bizarre things ever created by anybody, and yet it landed on the moon. It had no flight dynamics that would work in Earth orbit or anything. So what exactly do we think? Do you know more about what we really think they saw?
I think one of the most important things that came out of the reports, the independent sightings reports from the two pilots, both of them reported the impression that the object flew between their two planes, that it was maneuvering with them. Balloons do not maneuver with an F-22 Raptor aircraft. This is a top-of-the-line fighter aircraft. Now, look, I want to be fair here to the Air Force, because the F-22 Raptor is the top-of-the-line fighter aircraft in the American arsenal. There are very good reasons why they might want to protect the capabilities of its video systems, of its electro-optical systems. They are top of the line. But somebody has lied. In the Arrow report, Arrow says no video was recorded. As I've pointed out, Mr. Damse received under FOI an acknowledgement from the US Air Force that there is a responsive video requested by him, but it's not releasable for national security reasons. Why lie? Why lie?
Wow.
Why make such a misleading comment? There's a total contradiction there. And this is my issue. You know, we were talking before about the media lamenting that it's not being taken seriously anymore. And Diddums, I feel so sorry for them. They are losing their relevance because they are failing to appreciate the significance of what is coming out in this UAP issue. They are being overtaken by the awesome significance of events that they've completely ignored because they're frightened, timid, and so overwhelmed by the stigma of UAPs, and frankly so beholden to their Pentagon and intelligence community sources that they're frightened of offending them. What we're looking at here is deliberate lying by people in the national security establishment trying to conceal what's really going on. Here we have an incident that took place over the Gulf of Mexico. On the Defense Department's own records, there is an obvious contradiction. So here's a lead for mainstream media. Rather than lamenting the fact that you've lost your swagger, rather than lamenting the fact that online is taking away your influence and your credibility, how about covering stories that deserve covering? I mean, frankly, they don't have to really, because you and I can cover them and still get this audience that we're getting, which is substantial. People want this story.
Of course they do. And it's really not a very hard question to ask. Was there a video or was there not a video? That is kind of a toggle question that's yes or no. If there was a video, then do we get to look at it?
And why didn't they reveal? I mean, either the US Air Force didn't tell Arrow that there was a second fighter pilot there in a second fighter, or it didn't know. Imagine that. Imagine if the Air Force hadn't told Arrow, the Pentagon's UFO investigation office, that there was a second fighter. I mean, if you were Arrow and you were wanting to be seen to be transparent, you'd be kind of hoping, wouldn't you, that you'd been given all of the information that you needed to be able to do a proper inquiry. Well, I am told by a pilot who was briefed about this incident because he was about to fly in that area. He was one of multiple pilots who had concerns that they were being asked to fly in an area where an anomalous object had appeared to engage, maneuver around one of America's top line fighter aircraft. Now, if that's not a flight safety national security issue, I don't know what is. I mean, in my country alone, we've just had an incident where the Chinese fired flares at an Australian Seahawk helicopter in the sea near Taiwan, and that's become a huge international incident. Here we have an incident in a training area, a secure training area, where F-22 Raptor pilots are rehearsing for war. They need to have confidence that they can operate their machines safely. What happens? An object maneuvers between their two aircraft. And what does the Pentagon do? The Pentagon covers it up. What the hell is going on?
It blows your mind. There is anecdotal evidence, a lot of it, that there are a number of great videos that have been taken. And this doesn't just go to this year, it goes back to the beginning. To 1947 forward, pilots have been shooting images of these things. Yet, what do we have released from the Pentagon currently? We have those 3 videos that were confirmed that were basically, well, they weren't HD videos by any stretch. So the question is, how is it protecting national security to not even admit that you're looking into something like this? It seems like if there's national security issues, what should really be happening is you admit that there's something out there and at least assure the public you're looking into it. To assure the public there's nothing there seems to be the opposite of what we employ a government to do for us. So that's why people are rightly angry, Ross. And I guess the question I keep asking myself is, what does it take actually to get it only takes one. I mean, to get this ball rolling, it just takes one great HD video, not a photo, but the videos that we know exist. Why can't one of them be released? Who's able to make the decision that that never happens? Who's in charge of that?
I know. It's a very, very good question. You know, it's funny. I just do not understand why this is not a major issue, because in the last few weeks, you and I have discussed this incident at Eglin Air Force Base. I've talked about the Langley Air Force Base incident where so-called drones were operating with impunity over Langley. I've since received tips from a whole host of people about so-called drone sort of objects hovering over secure Air Force bases right across the United States. This is a pattern of behavior that's happening right across the US. And what's interesting to me is pilots are reaching out to me. People are saying, like this pilot that I spoke to a couple of days ago, they're worried that they're flying a top-of-the-line fighter that the American taxpayer has paid hundreds of millions of dollars for. They're worried they're going to have collisions with whatever these objects are in aerospace. And more importantly, they're concerned that whatever these objects are, they appear to be able to outmaneuver a top-of-the-line fighter aircraft. And what's the Pentagon doing? It's not talking about it. In fact, it's covering it up. I asked the pilot what he thought of the Arrow explanation that it's a prosaically explainable balloon. And he laughed and he said, the Air Force, like every other surface, doesn't like admitting that it doesn't have full control of our skies. They like to maintain an illusion of control. They don't like admitting that they simply don't know.
Well, they've been saying that's been the rationale, hasn't it, Ross, since the very beginning? I mean, people have been that analysis that you just laid out. I read in books going back to the 50s where people are saying, well, the government just doesn't want to admit that they don't have control of our skies. They clearly, well, again, we haven't been shared with honestly enough to say that they do or they don't. Possibly they do, and there's another reason. But over the years, people have been concerned, if you read UFO Twitter and all that, about people that jump to the threat analysis. There's a lot of, don't just make this all about a threat. But in reality, that is the way that our Congress is likely to kick the door down, to say, if you don't know what's flying around your nuclear facilities, it's a threat. and you need to analyze it. So there has to be some analysis. It's interesting though, because people, Ross, are on all sides of this issue. One of the guys who was the most dismissive, if you will, about the whole UAP issue was Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona. Remember, he wasn't really upfront about it, but he is a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and he said on, I think it was April 9th, he said, "We see consistent incursions around sensitive government facilities." Okay, well, I mean, does Senator Kelly think they're all drones? Is that the I mean, we got so many, we could go on for 5 episodes right now about drones.
It's funny. They have not brought one of these drones down. If these are just civilian
Right.
drones or worse, some kind of sophisticated foreign adversary drone, the military have spent millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars on developing anti-drone technology. We've deployed them into forward operating bases in countries overseas. And yet we haven't brought down one of these drones. If they are drones, where are they?
Well, I mean, when you say that, are you, by what method are you discounting the February attack of the drones over the United States? Right? Were they balloons? What was
February
going
last
on
year.
over the US?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and clearly one of those was very clearly a balloon. It was shot down. It was a balloon. And I suspect one or two others were. But as I've said previously, the object that was engaged over Alaska, I don't think that was a balloon. And neither do the people that I've spoken to, both in Congress and in the military. And what's interesting is there's not the level of transparency and disclosure that you would expect from a defense department that can confidently prove that these things are drones. If this is drone technology, prove it. I mean, how are our foreign adversaries, Russia and China, potential foreign adversaries, how on earth are they deploying drones, often for hours on end, far out to sea, in training areas operated by the US military, where there is no visible presence of Chinese vessels or submarines or anything that could explain where these drones are coming from? This is the issue, and yet we don't hear this being explored in the media. It's amazing to me.
That's what I was going to say. We have to tie this back in to the journalistic swagger issue. All right. Let's say that journalists, in order to feel confident to cover this, don't want to talk about UFOs. All right. Then talk about what's really going on. There are things in our airspace that the military controls that our own pilots are describing as anomalous. All right. Some of them might be drones. Some of them, if they are, then that's concerning. If they're not drones, then it's very confusing. But why aren't journalists willing to say, we're going to dive deep into this drone issue and we're not going to give up? We want to know what is flying around that the military is encountering. That clearly seems to be the door that Congress is trying to use to open this up. But you don't have to. These people that are afraid to cover UFOs or talk about UFOs because they won't be cool if they do, they can talk about these anomalous objects that are interfering with military airspace. That seems like a legitimate journalistic piece. Let's put a little swagger on that.
Well, let me give you an example. Marek von Rennenkamp, in his article in The Hill, where he essentially called the Pentagon out for lying that these are all drones, he reminded us of how in late 2019 and early 2020, you might remember there were news reports right across the United States of swarms of dozens, if not hundreds, of drone-like objects that were seen by residents, police, and military right across rural Colorado, Nebraska, and Wyoming. A huge swathe of the Midwest saw anomalous drone-like objects. Nobody ever saw a drone. And in fact, when they got close, these incidents, they were reported in the New York Times. There was significant media coverage, and sheriffs were reported saying they couldn't hear any engine. They couldn't see any engine. There was a sheriff, for example, who said he could not confirm that what he saw was drone activity because he couldn't hear any motor noise. The Federal Aviation Administration emails describe objects flying low, but, quote, no engine propeller noise could be heard. A Kansas Highway Patrol officer described an object passing 200 feet overhead. It was a brightly lit craft. absolutely no sound at all, even though the wind was calm. There were bright flashing lights, white, red, and green lights that were not consistent with standard aircraft light patterns or drone patterns. This is identical to what I was talking about last week on the last month on the Langley Air Force Base incident. And in another case, there was a Nebraska deputy sheriff reporting 30 to 50 objects flying independently of each other, quote, with a larger mothership hovering for hours. Now, these aren't drones. Drones don't hover for hours like this. There's something that is going on, operating often in adverse weather conditions, 30 to 40 mile an hour wind gusts, and not showing any apparent effect. And what happens is these froth up in the media from time to time. They get picked up by local media and then they just die. They get lost because there's this kind of titter of embarrassment when media go, oh, I don't want to talk about that anymore. But why? This is a lead. This is something real. And I can tell you, it's manifesting itself far more often now than it has been in recent years.
This is what journalists do. I do want to just though throw one thing out there because it always has confused people and they ask me about this all the time, which is sometimes on the cases that you were talking about, some of these objects were seen as displaying bright, flashing white, red, and green lights, not consistent with standard aircraft signal light patterns. Okay, so you're right. Drones tend not to do that, and so why would an advanced technology, which we might be dealing with, light itself up like a Christmas tree? What is it about that? Do we have any theories on that? Because I don't really, I mean, I know Spielberg back in Close Encounters, he had things that looked pretty much like they'd have been welcome on my own Christmas tree. So
maybe Bryce, maybe they want to be seen. And maybe this is the issue.
Answer. Yeah.
Maybe what they're doing, and I mean, we know this. We know that they're buzzing. Robert Hastings' excellent book, UFOs and Nukes, has revealed that for years these objects have buzzed just about every nuclear facility in the United States and all around the world. I was talking to somebody in India last week talking about objects buzzing an Indian nuclear facility. These objects are being seen all over the world, and yet there is this willful disregard to not taking seriously the fact that even the authorities are acknowledging these are a mystery. They never get one of these drones, even though they're seen for hours hovering over these facilities. They're videoed. The Langley Air Force Base incident, I've been squawking on about this for weeks, but the number of people who have contacted me and told me from within the base that there was very clearly a major security alert the nights that these objects were hovering over Langley Air Force Base. Nellis Air Force Base is another one that's had these objects hovering over them. And you know what? What surprises me is the way the military just goes really quiet. They talk about drones, and I think it's time to call out this technology, this terminology they're using. They're calling them either drones or balloons. And you know what? There's not a shred of evidence that it's either.
Well, and not only that, if the Chinese were flying drones near our nuclear facilities or between two F-22 Raptors, you got a Chinese drone or a Russian drone, you don't think we'd be trying to shoot that down? So either we're not trying to shoot these things down and yet they're still in our airspace, or we're trying to shoot them down and we're failing, or we're trying to shoot them down and we do, but we don't tell anybody. But it's just left as this giant mystery. And again, I go back to the journalism aspect of it. A giant mystery like that deserves the attention of our institutional journalism. I'm not saying that I'm not amused by the Stormy Daniels testimony and Donald Trump on trial and things like that. And I know it's important what's going on in Israel and Palestine. And I know about how I know that we're in a really tough time politically in our country and around the world, but come on. These are at least as important as those things if they portend what they might portend. So I don't know. I'm just it gets to me, and I just think I'm not happy, and you don't sound like you're happy. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing, and I also am really glad that pilots and other people who are in the know that you're a good source to talk to. You're not the only one. There are other people, obviously, who are also good sources to talk to. But the fact that they're coming forward and speaking up is good. Not all of them are speaking on the record. That's just not how it works, frankly. But if this continues, maybe somebody will take it seriously eventually, but they're certainly not right now. If anything, the evidence seems quite contrary to taking it seriously to the public. They may be taking it seriously behind closed doors.
Well, I just worry that it's going to develop into a national security incident,
Yeah,
because the thing that worries me is it's happening in Russia, it's happening in China, and it's happening in America. You know, one of the worst nightmares would be if one of our potential foreign adversaries thought that we were breaching their airspace and it led to some kind of retaliation, when in fact what's
yeah,
breaching the airspace is something anomalous, something unexplained. And this is why there was in fact a treaty that was signed between the US and Russia way back when in the 60s, which basically talked about UFOs. This is
right.
the hilarious thing. You know, the fact that, you know, the Pentagon maintains
Absolutely.
this mythology that it's not interested in UFOs, and yet written into a treaty is an acknowledgement that there will be anomalous objects, UFOs, that are seen from time to time. And here is a way of avoiding deconflicting to make sure that we alert each other if we see these anomalous objects and don't cause a third world war in the interim.
That's why it is so clearly national security. If there are anomalous objects out there and either side makes a mistake and says that's not an anomalous object, that's from our enemy, then you could get in a war situation with a heavily armed combatant nation, and that's got to be national security. I don't know any other way you could look at it. So, yeah, in fact, that's why you have hotlines between countries. You got to, and in fact, I don't know if that document's ever been proved real or not, but John Kennedy purportedly was interested in making sure that the Soviets at that time and he had the ability to not confuse each other about what was in the air and trigger an accidental nuclear war.
No,
So
it's well, yeah. I mean, I know the one I know you the one you're referring to, and whilst there's documents that are purportedly CIA documents where Kennedy was ordering the CIA to be more open with the Soviets,
right,
there is definitely an outer space treaty that was signed that talks about UFOs. And
right
David
on.
Grush, in this interview with me a year ago, talked about this and said he was shocked that this clause in this treaty had been declassified because it was previously treated as being very secret. But if you want, you know, you can actually go to the National Security Archive and you can actually look at a document that refers to UFOs as an issue of concern for deconfliction between the Soviets and the American government. So whatever they say, the big issue really behind all of this is why? Why are they lying? Why is there this cover up? And that's something we're going to keep on investigating.
Well, and as well we should. People ask me that most of all. I mean, what people really want to know, they they don't actually want to know anymore, are UFOs real? Because we've all kind of confirmed that there are unidentified objects that fly. So yeah, UFOs are real. So the conversation seems to be moving to what are they? And what do they want? And are we safe? And these are questions that any proud journalist could, sink their teeth into. We certainly do. So I guess I'm done with my rant on that topic for, I guess, the episode here. Do you want to go out on one of our mystery questions here, just to call it
Sure.
an episode here? What we did is we asked our viewers and our listeners on over our Twitter feed, X feed, to ask us any questions they wanted us to answer. We got 372 questions, so we can't answer all of them. So I've got 12 of them here right now. I've numbered them 1 through 12. Ross does not know what they are. These are 12 pulled at random from these Twitter questions. So Ross, play
Number
Karnak.
8.
Number 8. Here we go. Number 8. This is interesting. It's from Justin Pearson Smith, who is at Excelsior451 on X. He writes, is this still a bipartisan issue, or will both sides continue to sabotage each other so that they can be the ones to disclose? So I guess what he's really asking, Ross, is are we watching two sides form who are going to politicize yet even this issue? To which my answer is, well, of course we'll politicize it. We politicize everything. And even the Eglin case that you were talking about, you talked about Matt Gaetz going down there with two other Congress people, Burchett and Luna, both of whom are strong Trump supporters. So there, you on that side, you have the Trump team going down there. But then on the other side, you also have Gillibrand and Schumer, who are Democrats, working in the Senate. So I don't know. Do you think there is a disclosure race among partisan Republicans and Democrats?
I think it's easy to marginalize this topic by saying that a lot of the people on the Republican side are people who are perceived as being on the right-wing fringe. But the simple fact is, it's not really the case when you actually go into the Congress and talk to key senators and key congressional representatives. There's a much broader degree of interest in this subject on a bipartisan basis privately than there is publicly. A lot of congressional representatives and senators are very worried about speaking publicly about this issue because they are worried about the stigma. But I can tell you behind the scenes, and this is something that I feel sorry for our audience that they don't get to see. There are staffers and indeed politicians, key, very senior politicians, engaging on this issue in a bipartisan way. And I'm heartened by the fact that from both sides of politics, you've had Senator Marco Rubio on the Republican side, you've had Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Both of them have continued saying that there are unanswered questions that still deserve further investigation. And I can tell you privately, behind the scenes, there is a lot happening in the Congress.
You know, several things can be true at the same time. So what I would say to Justin, by the way, on his actual question is, yeah, it is still a bipartisan issue. That's the good news. It really is. There are people on both teams, and they're not looking at this yet as a strongly partisan issue to be used as a weapon against the other side, which is nice. But they probably will eventually. I mean, that's inevitable. Although, again, the hope that has been expressed many times is that if there is a disclosure of some kind of reality, and that reality might even be a non-human intelligence, if that's true, that might be the only Hail Mary that unites people. So I look for that. I hope that might be something to happen. And I just got to, if we're ending now, I just want to tell you something I saw on TV the other day that just made me laugh out loud. And this has a spoiler in it, Ross. So if any of our viewers or listeners are like, "Hey, I watch TV, don't you dare spoil anything," I'm not really spoiling anything that hasn't had a dozen articles already written about it and had X aflame with it. But I'm watching a show on Apple TV called Sugar. Have you heard about it or seen it?
I have. In fact, I took a peek at the trailer yesterday after you told me about this, and I'm going to watch it. It's Colin Farrell cruising around Hollywood in a big convertible.
Yeah, and it's I've been watching it with my wife. We've seen the first 6 episodes, and it's basically a pretty good private eye story. There's Colin Farrell looking dapper in his convertible, and he's driving around LA, and there's a lot of voiceover where he's talking about things, and the story he's looking into is a lot of subterfuge, but it's all this human drama of all that stuff that we've seen in literally the template of dozens and if not hundreds of private eye pieces over the years. So I'm watching episode 6. In the final scene of episode 6 of this dramatic private eye drama, Colin Farrell's voiceover says something to the effect that, sometimes you just got to, have some time to yourself to be yourself. Okay, great. He walks into his bathroom. This is the spoiler, folks. So hit the pause button now if you don't want to hear it. He walks into his bathroom, Ross. He takes out a kit. He unzips it. There's a giant hunker of a syringe in there with some weird fluid in it. He takes it. He jabs it into his neck and plunges this stuff into his neck. And while he's looking in the mirror, this private eye, his hair starts to fall out and his skin turns blue and is a freaking alien.
So, wow, that's a twist. Is there a sequel?
That is a twist. So, for all the people that say, I think the government is using the entertainment industry to prepare us for, disclosure or contact. I don't think they had to talk to whoever created this and given them that idea. I'm kind of interested to see what they do with it afterwards. But I got to tell you, as someone who's worked in Hollywood and pitched more than my share of things, I think if I pitch to anybody, here's the deal. We're going to do 6 episodes as a private eye drama. And at the end, he's a blue freaking alien. I don't think I wouldn't have got that on the air. So my hat is off. I think it's Mark Protosevich or something like that who created it. Mark, if you sold that to them, God bless you, man. That was pretty cool. So, yeah.
Well, I wonder what he knows. I mean, I do have a bit of a thing for blue aliens.
Well, people do talk about the blue aliens. I mean, Whitley Strieber has been talking about them for years. And if you go on X and look around, people will talk about blue aliens. But I don't think they were talking about that. It's the ultimate shapeshifter gag. And man, anyway, so anything is out there. And again, I bring that up only to monitor these kind of things, Ross, because we are in a world where what is real, such as some of the things we've been talking about with Eglin and the drones, get into real product. But then there's also things like what we just saw with Colin Farrell turning into a blue alien that somehow worm their way into the legitimate conversation as well, which is why it's really confusing to study this issue. It's been going back and forth like that for something like 70 years. In 1950, the very first movie on the topic was called The Flying Saucer, and it was kind of a Roswell-like piece. So this stuff is going on. I'm done. We can go home now, and we'll see everybody next month, right?
Good on you, Bryce. As always, lovely to see you and lovely to see our audience again. And we'll be back very soon with another probing Need to Know.